Back with another one. Lilo Godson, let's get into it. This is going to be part 3 of the colonizer narcissism series that I'm doing right now. Downloads are coming to me. The Most High wants me to deliver this message. So this video is going to be about the colonizers' narcissism smear campaigns. The colonizers' narcissistic smear campaigns. So yeah, once they've got control over a people or an area, let's say the Indian reservation for an example, or let's say like the ghettos in the hood, the projects, they call them projects because that's what they are. They're projects. They're testing, right? They're testing because it's all about trial and error. It's all about the psychology, right? It's all about the traumas. Let's keep these severely traumatized people and let's have them living close together so that we can track their trauma and we can track their families and their generations, and we can more control them with their family feuds and their issues, and we can infiltrate. We can know who has, who has drug issues, who has alcohol issues, who has abandonment issues, who has, you name it. They have all this information and they share it and they spread it to their generations in colonialism. So what they'll do is they'll run the smear campaign. So, because what they used to do in the indigenous communities and the native communities with the whole chief and council, have the chief and council, and I'm using this as an example so people can understand, because a lot of people don't know this, because that's another thing. Like, they work covertly, right? The colonizers are covert, malignant narcissists, so they like to control information. They don't like this information getting out because they know the truth is not in their favor. So they know they have to create a misinformation. They have to create a delusion, a shared fantasy. So they used to bring in the most least respected person of the village or the community, and they would make that person the chief. So what you can see what they do there, they automatically set up the systems, the colonial systems that they initiate, and they already set it up for failure, right? They set it up for failure, and they keep track of the families, they keep track of the traumas, they keep track of the conflicts, they document everything, and they share the information. And then they weaponize the police. They use the police. And the police go into the communities and they pretend to be their friends. They take pictures. So this right here is a narcissistic tactic. It's like the cognitive dissonance. If you look at the history, you're like, okay, these people came in here. They've murdered how many of our people? They've taken how many of our kids? And this was not long ago. This was like 50 years ago. Still, this generation. And now you're going to pose as our friends. But see, this is another tactic that the narcissists use. They pose as your friends, but they work as spies. They pose as your friends and they work as spies. Colonizers are not your friends. They're your enemies. They're here to take, kill, and destroy. That's what they do. And they do it while patting you on the back with a dagger in the stomach. And the people keep falling for the same trick over and over again. And the smear campaigns, they'll get involved in the affairs, because what they'll do is they'll send in like social workers, and the people will, they'll inflict this thought or this memory into their minds, into the indigenous people's minds, that that they're less than, and they need help and they need support, and the government is gonna pay for it, which the money is already the indigenous people's anyway, so they're not really giving you anything. It just looks like they're giving you something. It's called breadcrumbing. They're giving you what's already yours anyways, like the wealth that they've extracted from your lands, and they give you little pieces of it, and you're supposed to act like it's, like you're grateful for it. So anyways, that's what narcissists do, right? But so these social workers will come in and they'll get to know everything about your life, your family, your history, your traumas. But they're just documenting it all. And they're reporting back to their boss, right? Which is the colonizers' ancestors, which is the government. I'm going to say that again. Colonizers' ancestors are the government. And they get really involved. And it's easy to control people when they're only allowed to live in a certain, not even 0.5% of the land that's theirs. It's easier to control them. And that's what they do. They divide and conquer. That's why you'll see one nation in separate reserves. It's the divide and conquer colonial tactic. It's easier to control because then you can turn the people the same people against each other. These are war tactics. These are acts of war. It's narcissistic, covert, malignant narcissists. And they get off. They get off feeding off of your pain. They get off feeding on your emotional, low vibrational emotions, because that's where they vibrate at. That's where they can feed off of you. And now they're getting really desperate now because the world's seeing them for who they truly are. You know, there's a global world narcissistic crash that's happening right now, right? The serpent seed line. And what these institutions and these systemic narcissistic programs and workers will do is they'll all help each other. So they'll all help target the targeted victim, who's usually empathic. They're usually target empaths, and they'll work confederately against them. So they'll share information, they'll gaslight them, they'll pretend like they haven't had conversations with them, and they'll know stuff about you that you don't think they know. You think you're telling them stuff about you for the first time, but they already know. But a lot of times they'll ask you questions knowing the answer, and you'll answer, and you'll be thinking, wow, these people are asking all the right questions. I'm getting help and support, right? But no, they're spying on you. They're tracking your bloodlines, especially if you come from like a bloodline of like chieftainship, because those chiefs really do, even by these own colonial laws, are still the owners of the land. So they don't want those people like to wake back up. They don't want to initiate like this awakening amongst the true owners of the land, because they have the true power, right? They're the ones who are truly in the rulership, but they have to create, and that's what colonizers do. They target people who they know are superior, and they try to make them believe they're inferior, right? That's why you'll see in the indigenous communities, a lot of people, there's like this despair and hopelessness, and a lot of the people actually in the reserve are confederate with they're in the program, they're in with the colonizers. You know, a lot of them marry colonizers, right? Which is like a stock syndrome symptom, you could say, because that's what happens with abusers. People fall in love with their abusers. That's called Stockholm syndrome. When you fall in love with your abuser, that's why people stay in narcissistic relationships for so long. When you get abused for so long, when they're abusing you like these colonizers do, you get a low self-esteem. You lose your sense of self. And the next thing you know, these colonizers are taking your identity. They're taking your sense of self. They're taking your confidence. That's what they target, right? They target that because if they can take your confidence away from you and you knowing who you are, then they can say that they are you, and you will be dependent on them in order to have an identity. Man, these guys got figured out, man. These guys have been doing this shit for far too long, man. This is ridiculous at this point now. And now they're getting called out everywhere. So now they're panicking. So what I would warn people is watch these colonizers now, because they're doubling down on everything. Yeah, they fool a lot of you guys, but they don't fool me. I see their tactics. I see what they're doing. That's why they're gang stalking. You might hear about gang stalking. If you don't know about gang stalking, go look up gang stalking and targeted individuals. These are colonial tactics. What they'll do is they'll use systemic oppression. They'll use systemic resources. They'll use people, the public. They'll use immigrants. They'll use essentially, your own family, your own people, and they'll target you. And they'll just make your life really difficult. They've been doing this for a long time. They normally target people who are a threat to their white supremacy or a threat to the colonialism, who can see what they're doing. But yeah, colonialism is covert narcissistic abuse. That's what it is. And it's all being revealed now. It's all coming out. And that's what they're going to do. When narcissists get exposed, you got to watch out, because they double down. They get very sadistic. They get very primal. Because remember, these are serpent seed lines. They're like, they got a lot of, they're operating from the reptilian brain, right? And you guys know how reptiles are. You know how reptiles get down, right? They're cold-blooded creatures, and they're predatorial. And they're kind of filthy, right? Let's be honest. Reptiles are filthy creatures. That's why you don't really want to touch them and pet them. They're not mammalian, right? They're born in eggs. They hatch, cold-blooded, right? But yeah, colonizers, gang stalking, marginalized communities for control, for power, for manipulation, to continue the lies, to continue the shared fantasy. But yeah, I'm going to keep these videos just down to 10 minutes because these are great revelations and downloads I'm having. So I'm going to end this one here. Thanks for tuning in. Shalom to the kings and queens. Stay tuned because I'm about to do a part 4. Shalom.